Welcome back to the Establish the Edge off-season projection special with myself and Ben Gretch. If you haven't listened to the first two episodes, you can do so. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you're on the podcast feed or on the YouTube channel. If you're listening, do know that we have this up on YouTube as well on the Establish the Edge channel. Also, make sure you're following Ben and his content at bengretch.substack.com. You can find all my stuff over at Establish the Run. But AFC East, we'll jump right in with Buffalo. Everyone listening knows I'm a Bills fan, so the homer takes are ready, Gretch, as I make excuses for some young Buffalo Bills players. But from a play calling standpoint, not a ton here. We both have the Bills slightly below average in pace at just over 62 plays per game. Have the Bills a little bit below average in pass rate, around 58% called pass rate for both of us. That leads to very similar play calling numbers. We're expecting around 31.5 pass attempts per game and just over 29 rush attempts per game. Gretch, anything to add on the play calling side for Buffalo?
Well, I wanted to ask you about that a little bit because their play volume kind of cratered, but they were second in points for. Was it just like their efficiency was so good? I mean, I think that's kind of the way they played.
Their efficiency was good, but they do play a little bit slow under Brady. Our neutral pace, over expected. We have them, below average, but not like bottom five or anything, just a little bit below average. So that's part of the reason we're expecting them to bounce back is we don't have them. We have them playing below average, but not like, crazy slow.
That's what I was thinking. That's why our numbers are so close, as I was viewing it the same way. Is that their play volume kind of cratered last year, but in a way that was probably because they were so good. And so it's either a good thing that they're that efficient, or if they're a little less efficient, they're going to have to run more plays, like by definition, to get through drives and things. And
we're both a little bit higher on the pass rate, kind of expecting a little bit of that regression and the offense being so efficient and just some game script stuff too. And obviously, the pass rate generally, correlates a little bit positively with plays run. You're generally running more plays if you're throwing more. So we're both baking in some regression on those two categories.
Yeah, and then just broadly with this offense stuff, it's probably a good thing to jump in here with some of their trends from a scoring perspective. So last year, their rush pass TD splits, they had 32 rush touchdowns, 30 pass TDs. Working backward, the previous 4 seasons, they were at 22 rush TDs, which is going to be the high in their 4 prior years. And so they were all the way up at 32 this past year. 22 and 29 pass, 15 and 35, 20 and 36, 16 and 40. So in 2023, they were at 29 pass TDs. They were at 30 in 2024. Again, both under Brady. I think there's probably a real shift here. But you look at the 2020 to 2022 range, they were at 35 to 40 pass TDs every year, 15 to 20 rush TDs. And so that difference in 2023, 22 rush TDs to 2024, where they got up to 32 rush TDs, is what I'm looking at as I don't really know how to play that, in part because the look-ahead line still has this team expected to score the most points in the league. Their 32 rush TDs last year, I was surprised by this, Mike. 3 more than the Eagles and Detroit. My watch is talking to me. 3 more than the Eagles and Detroit as the league leader, 7 more than every other team. There was no one else over 25. But I would have thought the Eagles were still ahead of the Bills in rush TDs, just, I guess, for my mental calibration. But I guess I think it's fascinating that Allen still got there and was, the MVP, because he's the offense, even in a year where he didn't throw a ton of TDs. And so if some of this shifts back, I think probably there's meat on the bone for Allen's pass TDs as part of the way that I was looking at it.
Yeah, I think, as you said, there is a marked shift under Brady, but we still shouldn't expect it to be, I think, greater than 50% rushing touchdowns. We have the Bills with 28 passing touchdowns, 24 rushing touchdowns on this season, I believe.
I'm at about 29 and 26, so I have a few more overall projected to hit the numbers that I have as an expectation, that because I was below expectation when I got done with my projection as well, and I had to juice the touchdown numbers to get to where I thought Vegas look ahead lines had them for points, but my stuff comes in a little hot, as we've talked about.
Yeah, we do actually, with our, that note, we do have them slightly leading Baltimore for the most touchdowns per game.
Okay.
We've got 3 teams that are just over 3 touchdowns per game, being Detroit, Buffalo, and Baltimore right now. So
my scale probably just goes a little higher. I mean, for reference, I have them for 55 total touchdowns. They had 62 last year, so I do have them coming back. But you guys are what they had last year led the league, I think, or at least led the league on the rushing side, right? 62 touchdowns is a ton to project. It's too high, right?
Yeah. As far as I definitely think some stuff could swing the way of passing touchdowns for Allen. There's a ton of upside. I think bottom line is Allen's just so responsible for everything that they do that, him and Lamar, I think, are like just clearly the top 2 QBs. We've hit on there being some room to go late round QB in the first 2 episodes, but we did in the first episode in particular talk about formats like the FFPC main event, where having this elite quarterback in that sprint from weeks 15 to 17 can be beneficial. So I think, Allen's in play with that. In best ball too, when he slips in the 4th round, I think he's a lot more stackable this year, at least from a price perspective. There's still going to be some really annoying things stacking him with the Buffalo offense being spread out target shares, and as we've hit on, potentially low pass TD volume and low pass volume in general, just because this team did seem to shift a little bit more to the run. The defense seems like it's always really good in the regular season. McDermott's really good defensive coach, but as far as price of the pass catchers, you can stack Allen a lot more easily this year than last year.
Yeah, and I think that range, I think that range of non-QBs gets pretty flat. And I mean, it's not that it's not enticing, but there are question marks with a lot of the profiles. And so usually the way that I want to play QB in drafts just strategically is when things are flat at other positions. That's when I want to be thinking about hitting on QB. I don't think the elite QB prices I don't think the opportunity cost is as bad this year. They're a little cheaper, as you said, which is helpful. And I think that range is a little bit weaker than most years. Like the 4th round range is a little weaker, 3rd round on FFPC, depending on where you're playing, is a little bit weaker than the profiles you would typically see in those rounds, which is not to say that they're all bad or anything like that. But, a lot of that comes down to whether there's like some game breaker in those ranges. It's the guy you need. It feels like it may not be that this year in the sense that then having a player like Allen, who does provide you a real benefit, could be the right way to be building.
Yeah, and I feel pretty good about our best ball ranks, but some of our redraft rankings, it's a little bit harder to, like, from an automated system, get these nuances and these wrinkles. And, I'm looking at our FFPC ranks, and we're about half round behind ADP on Allen. And it's just a weird dichotomy because some of the value quarterbacks, you go so late when you're only drafting one quarterback in these, that we don't want to push the quarterbacks too much because we end up being really far ahead of ADP on those guys. But as a result, we're a little bit behind on Allen. But I am looking at like kind of the mid-tier, especially some of the running backs that go in round 4, Kamara, Chuba Hubbard. Definitely would rather take a shot personally on Allen or Lamar. We have Lamar as the QB1, but we have him back to back. I do probably slightly prefer Lamar to Allen, but not like a huge gap or anything.
Yeah, makes sense.
Let's go to running back because the rushing touchdown regression conversation affects James Cook in a big way. I believe he went from 2 rushing touchdowns to 16. So a tale of 2 seasons for Cook in terms of running bad on touchdowns and then running good on touchdowns. He led the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year. It did go from 2 to 16.
The rush TD stuff, like when you look at the rush TD rate when you're doing a projection, I think the league average number I use is like 2.8% for running backs. I tend to not go below 2.0%. You'll see the really good backs be up over 4.0%. And that's where you're like, okay, maybe I'll project up near 4 for the really good guys, or above 4 in some cases. But in the 3s is like really strong. I just say that to to tell you, tell the listeners what the Cook rush TD rates were the last 2 years: 0.7% in 2023, and then 7.3% in 2024.
Just multiply it times 10. It's crazy. The Cook conversations, we both have them. We have them around like 9 to 10 rushing touchdowns. Total, you got him at 245 full PPR points. We're at 207. The Cook conversation is interesting to me. I feel like right now he's a decent value, just betting on an efficient player and a good offense, with people being, I think, a little spooked by the potential holdout stuff that's been going on with him. I'm not really worried about that. It doesn't seem like too much has come from it. It's hard to quantify the real risk of these things. They have not reached a new deal. I don't necessarily think they're going to reach a new deal, but I don't think he's going to end up holding out. So I think with that, he's a good value. I could see if they reach a new deal or people just become unconcerned with the holdout risk and his ADP rises come August, he could get too rich. And the concerns for me with Cook, if the ADP were to get more into like the third round, especially the early third, he has a lot of games, Ben, where you're looking at like 12 carries, 3 targets. And it's just, and he's an efficient player, but he's not like otherworldly efficient. This isn't Jahmyr Gibbs efficiency. He's been high 4s in yards per carry the last 2 seasons. Very solid, but not anything crazy. It's just hard to, make a living with a high-end ceiling at 12 carries and 3 targets a game unless you're running for 16 touchdowns again.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that, they bring in Ray Davis, they're going to use him some, and they may use him a little more if, Cook misses the whole offseason or what have you. The third guy is the guy we talked about on the show last year, and I think talked about him being more draftable than people realized, is Ty Johnson, who I remember us having that discussion where I think Josh Allen or the coaching staff had said they think he's the best third down back in the league. They treated him that way last year. He had a good year. He actually got out in routes. He had 229 air yards, most in the NFL for a running back by a ton. I think Saquon was the only other back over 100 last year. They were throwing, he had like a real ADOT. They were throwing him a lot of like wheels and deep routes. That stat is very interesting as well because Ray Davis also has 50 air yards overall. And typically this just means for running backs that they had a couple downfield throws because their ADOTs are usually about 0. They're right around the line of scrimmage. And so this is, okay, Ray Davis did have a couple deep passes. And I remember he caught one deep. And so his yards per target winds up looking incredible for a running back, in part just because he catches like one 30-air-yard throw or something over the course of a season. Ty Johnson had a few of those. They both had really high receiving TD rates. James Cook only had 4 air yards for the whole season. So he was one of those running backs that's right around a 0 ADOT. But it's fascinating because that's something I highlighted as a positive in his profile last year because he had 76 and 112 air yards over the first 2 years. So the downfield opportunities for the running backs in this pass game were still there. For some reason, they didn't go to Cook this year. I guess I don't think that's like definitely going to stick. I do think the third down stuff with Ty Johnson is true, but that's one thing that was weird about Cook's 2024 that actually might come back. And I do project it to come back a little, that I don't think he's just suddenly not going to be running some of these wheel routes and things because he's an explosive player as well. I just think that the ball went to the back when it wasn't Cook who was running the route. Maybe there was less attention on the back when it was Ty Johnson or Ray Davis running the route. But Cook probably should get a few opportunities to be explosive in the pass game. I know you look at the 16 rush TDs and immediately, I think that has to regress. He only had 2 the year prior. But they talked about it all offseason. Joe Brady was this new coach. We expected a little bit of a shift. The rush TDs did shift dramatically, and 16 is a ton. You can regress that and still see him as an above average touchdown type of runner. And again, we just got done talking about we're both projecting this team to score the most touchdowns in the league based on market factors, look ahead lines and those things. They're expected to be a team that scores a bunch of points. And if James Cook's out there, it seems like he would be, it's hard to be like he's going to have a below average rush TD rate again. That's not the way that it's going to shift back. So, or that wouldn't be the expectation. So there should be some regression, but the rush TD regression is baked in at its cost. But then the ceiling point is another one that you just made that I think is a really interesting one and a really good one, because I don't know that there's a lot of opportunity for him to be the workhorse because of Davis and because of Ty Johnson. So the whole thing is really tough. And this, I think, goes for their receiving weapons to a degree as well. You listen to them talk about this offense. They talk about everyone eats and like they want everybody to have their role and be role players around Josh Allen is basically the way it works, which is not necessarily great for fantasy. James Cook is the best thing going for consolidation of volume. And there are some ways, like I said, with the receiving that could swing back favorably for him, but he probably is just going to kind of work back from that. And when I got done with the projection, I got a really high number for him, but I also felt like from the reasons that you said that this is close to his ceiling, that there's not a lot of meat on the bone for him to have a monster upside season above it.
Yeah, I think we see it pretty similarly, which is like a little bit underpriced right now, but if he got very expensive, you'd be concerned about the ceiling. Ray Davis, I think is a solid RB2. I think there's opportunity for him to maybe cut into some of the rushing touchdowns that Cook had last year, and just a good contingency back. Ty Johnson, as you noted, he's going to play the role he's going to play. But if Cook were to go down, I do think we'd see, a heavy dose of Ray Davis as opposed to like an even split between Ray Davis and Ty Johnson.
Yep, I think that's right.
At receiver, the receivers are tricky again because they spread things out. Like Ben said, everyone's sort of a role player in this offense, which is tough when a team doesn't throw a ton and has a lot of TD volume coming from the ground. So you do get ceiling concerns, but you get some pretty cheap price tags, and there's not a ton of target competition if someone were to kind of emerge as, a more reliable player. That's Ben Shakir. His targets per out run, really strong. He gets all the easy stuff for the Bills. His catch rates the last 2 years, I think it was like 80% 2 years ago, mid-70s last year. And if you look at any advanced like expected catch rate metrics, he's pretty high up there. So I do think there's some sustainability in terms of a player that's pretty safe for volume and going to convert a lot of that volume into catches. Concern for Shakir, of course, is just, can he hit the high-end efficiency from a ceiling perspective? We do have him right now a little bit ahead of ADP across most sites.
Yeah, the tricky thing for me is the first 2 years his targets per out were 12.1%, 13.6% at higher ADOTs. And then last year is when it really breaks out. He's up at a 24.9% targets per out, basically combining his first two seasons, or doubling his first two seasons at a way lower ADOT, 5.6. And that's because of what you talked about, was they added a specific role in this offense. Part of why I was excited on Dalton Kincaid last year is I expected him to get more downfield work, but he, in 2023, got some short area stuff. And I thought that might be his work last year. It very much wasn't. It was all Khalil Shakir, these swing passes, these designed. They were a sort of a run-based team, and they use Allen's rushing as well to keep a lot of players in the box. And then they just throw swing passes to Khalil Shakir, get him on the edge, moving laterally, and he cuts upfield where he can. And he's very good with the ball in his hands. And to your point, these are really high catch rate plays. They're design plays. They're quick release, like it's low time to throw. And so as far as like target earning, Khalil Shakir's targets per route jumps a ton. He sees a ton of targets in year 3. But I also think that development is fascinating from the perspective that it feels very schemed. It feels very, this is what the role is. And defenses could theoretically try to take that away, or the Bills offense could evolve in a way that it's not as much of a priority. And if that's the case, what else does he have with the first 2 years not earning a ton of volume? He has the efficiency, which you mentioned. He's always been efficient, even at the higher ADOTs. He makes plays downfield in a big way. I do think he's a high floor player, but I think there's more risk to him maintaining the target rate than there really is upside for him, because he hasn't shown an ability to really earn volume in a lot of different depths and in a lot of different ways. However, there's not other like key players in this passing game that feel better ways to play. Like I think Shakir is like the obvious way to play it. If you look at like what they did in the postseason, he had 6, 7, and 7 targets in the 3 games. And was like clearly their main guy in the postseason games. Like that's what he's going to be, is like 6 or 7 targets a game and be efficient on those. He's going to catch them at a high rate, like you said, and those things. So I think he's a high floor player. He's probably a lot more viable in best ball, I think, than managed, where you're kind of looking for a little more ceiling with you have to pick which weeks to start guys and all of that stuff. But yeah, to me, he's a little tough of a pick because of the lack of ceiling. Probably more of just a stat guy.
Yeah. I'm slightly more optimistic, but I definitely get that point of view, and particularly the best ball versus redraft consequences. Keon Coleman, this is where my homerism will come out, because I'm holding a light on for Keon Coleman here in year 2. I feel like the vibes on Coleman are pretty bad, but like if you look at his season last year from a yards per out run standpoint, I mean, like he was better than Ricky Pearsall on more routes than Ricky Pearsall. And I just see so much Ricky Pearsall hype. He's going like 30 to 40 picks earlier. And that's something that I don't like fully get. Keon Coleman, had a lower catch rate, was kind of like the opposite of Khalil Shakir, but he had a lot of downfield success. His total yards per route run, his yards per target were very solid. I think he's got, if there were a guy to break through with double-digit receiving touchdowns in this offense, it's probably him. I don't want to overplay how much I like Keon Coleman, but I do think he's a little bit, I think there's a bit more upside here than the market gives credit for a year 2 receiver.
I like that. I like that a lot. He had a solid targets per route for the ADOT that he had. A 15.2 ADOT is very high. To your point, he was still pretty efficient. And despite some, minor concerns, the coaching staff, it's been interesting to hear him talk about him this offseason. They talk about how he got a little banged up, and when he came back, he wasn't as consistent. He closed the season poorly. There's some of those things, but I think they still feel like there's a lot of room for growth going into year 2 and that kind of a thing. So is 1.7 yards per route run, all that stuff, very fine for a rookie. It's not like stuff that you can ignore or throw away, like to your point.
The other thing, and this is where, I will get in trouble with Kincaid, and I've gotten in trouble with players in the past, is maybe giving them too many excuses on the injury out. But Coleman did seem like he was starting to really find his footing a little bit there. Had, back-to-back 7-target games, a 4 for 125 against Tennessee, 5 for 71 against Seattle, and then he gets hurt in that Miami game. And I know the team had some comments about being a little disappointed how he came back from injury. But just noting, it's possible that season went, a very different way if he does not get hurt against Miami.
Yep. And I guess that's explains part of my concern on Shakir. It's just like, if Coleman is able to break through in year 2, Kincaid, we'll talk about, had a very injury plagued season. If he's able to do just basically anything more than he did, they brought in Josh Palmer. Curtis Samuel is in this offense. Elijah Moore. I don't even know who, they got a million dudes in this offense that are probably Dawson Knox still. Shakir's the obvious one, and the guy who was really efficient and should earn more volume because of the efficiency, but there's opportunities for other guys to do more this year. Coleman is I like your point. He's like the primary option for that. The likeliest to lead in touchdowns. When I went through the receiving touchdown rates, I had his highest. And he's the other guy that if you're making a bet on someone taking a step forward, but if he doesn't, I could see being higher on Shakir. Is basically why I'm tying that back to Shakir. If some of that inconsistency plagues him in year 2, then they have to rely on Shakir. Like, they're not going to not rely on the guy that was really efficient last year.
Beyond that, they've got Josh Palmer, Curtis Samuel, Elijah Moore. I spent a lot of money on Curtis Samuel, and that just did not go as anticipated. I think Josh Palmer, he late round stat candidate in best ball, probably going to have some splash weeks down the field. I don't know if we really have to talk in depth on any of these guys. No. Would beginning of the season maybe would keep an eye on Elijah Moore if he were to carve out a more significant role.
The tricky thing with Moore is he's both not earned a lot of targets per route. The reason he was a little bit interesting last year is the Browns ran a ton of routes with Jameis Winston down the stretch. So Moore was like 9th in the NFL in routes run last year or something. He ended up very, very high, but his numbers per route didn't really improve. So he's both, I look at yards per route run in the component parts, targets per route, and then yards per target. He's both not great before the catch at earning a ton of volume for a low ADOT guy, And he's also really bad at yards per target. he's like, for a low ADOT guy, his catch rates are like below 60%. And in modern NFL, a lot of these guys at those ADOTs are catching over 70%. Like you mentioned, Shakir, he's catching probably over almost 80%. I mean, like, I think Elijah Moore's probably not as good as people want him to be. So that's the tricky thing there. Josh Palmer, they're talking about very favorably as a blocker. He's going to be out there and running routes like Mac Hollins kind of was in this offense last year. So I like that point about he's a stack candidate. We'll have a higher ADOT. We'll have some splash games and, you know, some touchdowns and some longer catches sometimes, and can be somewhat efficient. Was in Los Angeles with the Chargers, but he's not going to be a big target earner. So he's just sort of a stack candidate in my mind. And then you mentioned it with Samuel, just didn't make a huge splash last year, but he had 46 targets and 5 carries. Like 50 opportunities is not nothing when you're doing a projection. He's going to be a part of the offense probably as well.
To put numbers on things, Gretch has Shakir at 108 targets. We're at 94. We're both in the low 70s for Keon Coleman. Gretch has Palmer at 70. We're at 56. So just have the back end a little bit more spread out right now. Going to tight end, Gretch is at 85 targets for Kincaid. We're at 84. We're both right around 35 for Dawson Knox. Kincaid, very disappointing year 2. There's a lot of concerns here in terms of just finding the volume. Will the routes ever be there? Like Dawson Knox is playing kind of more of the regular tight end role. We see that in the red zone too, which, you know, it's tough. I know Karane's done a lot of stuff about, you know, having the tight ends that run block, because then they're involved in the play action game in the red zone area, and Kincaid loses that. And they also have you talk about Shakir, there's this weird dynamic of like, well, then if Shakir's playing in the slot, you know, where's Kincaid playing? And they had some better team success when he was off the field, but he was also very hurt. And when he was out there, despite being hurt, like his targets per route run was really strong. The targets per route run combined with ADOT was actually like pretty unique for a tight end. He was 4th in targets per route run, 27%. Jonnu Smith, Evan Ingram, Trey McBride were the 4 ahead of him. Those guys all had ADOTs around like 5 to 6. Kincaid's was at 8. So there's part of me that with him going so cheap wants to just play that and just be like, I don't know, maybe there's some way the chaotic season plays out where he just ends up earning more routes. And if he does earn a lot of routes, it's a lot more meaningful, you know, tight end upside than you typically find in that portion of the draft. I don't think that's likely to happen. I just think it's a decent gamble.
The touchdown stuff that you mentioned is so odd because he started at San Diego and then transferred to Utah. The Utah didn't really play in 2020. He didn't really play, but in 2018 and 2019 at San Diego, he had 11 and 8 touchdown receptions. And then in 2021 and 2022, he had 8 touchdown receptions both years at Utah. Basically all 4 of his main college years, other than the COVID year, he had 8+ receiving TDs. So that seemed like something in his profile that he was maybe going to be able to bring to the NFL. But I don't know what to make of him either. The hope was more routes, as you said. The interesting thing is targets per out run was still extremely high, despite his ADOT rising this year. His targets per run was 26%. Knox's was 10%. There's a massive gap there in terms of which tight end they're prioritizing when they're actually in a route. But Knox ran way more routes because of the Kincaid injuries. And I do agree with you that it doesn't seem like Kincaid's probably going to consolidate the routes. You're kind of betting on something that seems unlikely, but not certain. There are scenarios where we may see Kincaid run more routes for one reason or another. I will say his quiet playoff run does concern me a bit. Only 9 targets in 3 games when he had been back for a few weeks and they needed him to probably do something. And they're trying to run their offense as efficiently as possible. And they just basically didn't use him. And I was like, all right, well, maybe, you know, I was into
and
Dalton
dropped
Kincaid
a 4th down
year.
pass to end the season.
That's probably not great either. I was into Kincaid last year. I think the way that last year went, as far as, you know, a year 2 season is pretty poor for what you're thinking this former first round pick is going to ultimately be. But I'm with you. He's cheap enough that you can take some stabs at him because of stuff like that, really high targets per route, because of some of the potential, at least, for him to maybe capture some of that touchdown stuff from his prospect profile, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, to me, again, feels more ancillary at this point. It feels this passing game does not feel like a super fun one unless you're stacking with Josh Allen, because it does feel like they're going to spread the ball around and keep defenses guessing about where it's going to go.
Yeah, I do like Kincaid a little bit in the FFPC redraft. Just if the breakout happens, it's going to be catch volume. Like I don't think he's going to get the routes to get there, but if the ceiling case happens, it's not that like he randomly scores 10 touchdowns, on like a small amount of targets. It's that he catches an extraordinary amount of balls for a tight end. And then at 1.5 points per reception, you're really getting paid off for that bet. So less interested in like a half PPR redraft league for him. Let's go to Miami. They're difficult to project. They just had so many random issues the last couple of seasons, whether it's Tua's injury, O-line stuff. We still kind of know who they are. Gretch and I are both at like 63 plays per game, around a 61% called pass rate. We've got them at 35 pass attempts, 25.5 rush attempts per game. We're pretty dialed in on the play calling stuff. They weren't as slow as they've been in the past last year. I know at times McDaniel's been slow with the motion stuff. We have them actually, though, in terms of like the pace over expected the last 2 years is like pretty neutral and fine. So that's why the place expectation is there. Tua, the 3 seasons with McDaniel, he's averaging 269 passing yards per game. That would have been, across a large stretch of games, that would have been good for 4th in the NFL last year. So this is an offense I'm intrigued about. Like, you can see a lot of ways where it could I'm forgetting the word that I'm trying to come up with
Unravel?
right now. Yes, unravel. You can see a lot of, thank you, a lot of ways it could unravel, but if it goes right, some really good prices, chance at a condensed offense, a chance for some real league winners here, in my opinion. And Tua's price tag in particular right now is just, I just think it's way too low. In a single quarterback redraft league, I don't know, how much you're even getting into QB20, but for underdog to get Tua in the 150s is pretty exciting to me right now.
His scramble rate collapsed last year. I think the rush yards should be expected to be very low. And part of that was because he got another concussion, went on IR for 4 games early in the season. He did return after people were talking about his career might be over. It seems like never really in doubt to return after 4 years. They kind of put him on IR to give him the time to recover. We talked about it with Olave a little bit. The concussion stuff is really scary, but it is, as far as the immediate impact on health, you're waiting for the brain swelling to go down and for the players to not have symptoms anymore, but then they can probably play through it. But, if he has another concussion, you would expect him to miss more time than the average player getting a concussion. So there's some concern there for sure. He missed 6 games last year. It feels like the really bad concussion year was maybe 2023. It was actually 2022. He did play all 17 games in 2023. He threw 29 touchdowns. He was pacing for 29 again in 2024. So the rushing stuff might not be great, but to your point, the passing yards and the passing TDs should be there. They're going to throw the ball in the red zone a little bit more than most teams. They did a lot of the quick hitting passing in the red zone and in the green zone, inside the 10, they're throwing to Achane, they're throwing to Jonnu Smith on kind of quick hit stuff to get the ball on the edge. Broadly, this system has been great for fantasy. You talked about the possibility for concentration. I just want to emphasize that you have it with Tyreek Hill, and his routes weren't at the top of the league, but his per route stuff in 2022 and 2023 was massive. Waddle, in addition to that, had really high per route stuff where, like, even though Tyreek was number 1 in the league in like targets per route, Waddle would be like number 6 in the league. That type of concentration, stark difference from what we were talking about with the Bills. And we saw it last year with Achane, and we saw it with Jonnu. Jonnu starts the year with 9 catches in 4 games, basically not being involved. He's cut in like most managed leagues. I know he was cut in deep tight end premium, like on FFPC, because I was adding him in some cases, and I wasn't even really into Jonnu last year. But then he comes back late in the year in full PPR. He has double-digit points in all of the final 8 games, which is a type of consistency at tight end that's very valuable. In 5 of those, he was over 19 PPR points per game in 5 of the final 8. Just a lot of volume for a tight end there, right? And that's the kind of thing that the point that I wrote here is the base projection in some instances to me almost doesn't matter. Like it's super hard to dial it in. You look at those splits with Jonnu, 9 catches in 4 games to start the year. And then later in the year, he's getting double-digit points every single game. If you get into that role in a Mike McDaniel offense where he's running the offense through you and he's calling the plays for you, it can be super, super valuable. Another note on this would be Achane. In 2 of his 11 games, he averaged 6.1 receptions per game. In the 6 that Tua missed, he averaged 1.8. An absurd split. And that 6.1 receptions per game is so high that Achane had more receptions than any running back by 10 in the NFL, which is, I mean, a massive way to gap the league when the quarterback that was throwing all the passes to you misses 6 of the games. And basically Mike McDaniel stopped calling those plays. They're the quick hitter plays on the perimeter, get the ball in Achane's hands on like wide receiver screens that he didn't want to run with the other quarterbacks. He just called handoffs. And that's why you see Achane's receptions crater. And so maybe that's a concern for Achane's receiving. I also look at it like if Tua would have played 17 games, Achane might have caught 30 more balls than every other running back in the NFL. I mean, he might have had a 100 catch season and just really gapped everybody. So this offense is very fascinating in that way. And I do think because of the way we look for upside, you do have to be, as you were saying, be willing to take some stabs.
Yeah, it's really interesting to figure out, though, like how it's going to play out. You mentioned the very positive Jonnu and Achane stuff. If you're zooming out and taking a longer view, you'd expect Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to be more involved in the passing game than they were. So difficult to figure out those projections. And let's look at Achane. We do have a discrepancy in targets as a result of that. You're at 95, we're at 69. But we do have like a better ceiling case on him. A lot of guys with Miami are going to have, a wider gap between our base volume case and our ceiling volume case. I'd say Achane is one of the players in the first couple rounds of the draft that I most like more than our rank. Our rank's a little bit behind ADP, but my thought on Achane is like he went at the 1-2 turn last year in the hopes that he would get the volume that he did get last year. O-line issues, some health stuff with Tua, and the efficiency wasn't there. But we've seen the home run upside from him in a season more so than like any other player. So you're going to tell me I get that home run upside, and we've got a documented season of the type of workload that can win leagues. I really, really like Achane. This is what I'm going like more out on a limb against our kind of projected ranks right now. So I'm very pro Achane. Not totally sure what to do with running back position behind him. So curious your thoughts on the running back room altogether and how you feel about Achane in that like early mid round 2 spot that he goes.
I love your optimism about it because it reinforces mine as well. I agree with everything you said. We get the 2 different types of seasons where if you can put it all together, you can be the RB1 overall, basically. You get the real efficiency that you need to have the real ceiling, like the legendary upside. You need to be an efficient player, and we saw that as a rookie. And then in year 2, to your point, if the volume comes, his advanced metrics really fell off as far as like the missed tackles for, some of that stuff I talk about. Still had 4.5 yards per carry because this is a guy that's so explosive that like the yards before contact stuff, a lot of people think about that just as the blocking, but the more explosive backs tend to have higher yards before contact because they hit the holes harder and quicker. And so he doesn't need to make guys miss as much or have dynamic missed tackles force numbers or broken tackle numbers to still have a decent yards per carry. So the floor for rush efficiency does actually seem pretty high. And then to your point, the ceiling potential, he averaged like 7 yards per carry or 8 yards per carry as a rookie. It was only on like 100 carries, but the ceiling is there if the explosive plays hit on, and that's like how Saquon got there last year. We know defenses are getting lighter. We know that like run D is not as prioritized in the NFL. Explosive runners that can hit on a lot of long touchdown runs feel like a way to get there in 2025 fantasy football. So you have that and you couple it with the receiving. You were talking about the gap in our receiving. I'm very hot on it, projecting him for basically the same number of receptions as last year. But that's because, as I said, he had such huge splits in games Tua played and Tua missed 6 games. What if Tua plays? I mean, I do think it's very similar to what I was saying about Shakir. It's schemed stuff that could go away. And we see that when Tua misses time and they just stop calling those plays. And that goes back to the difficulty I have with Shakir. It's like that stuff can just go away. It did for Achane last year. And yet his season played out in a way that there does feel like meat on the bone for that reception projection. So I just put it basically where it was last year, thinking there's room for it to go up or down, which is means that there's a huge ceiling, to your point. I really like Achane too. Behind him, Jalen Wright was not very good last year, and that's tricky. He was a round 4 pick. Ollie Gordon was their round 6 guy this year, but from a better class, and he's the new guy, and he has size. And so he's the one that I kind of like playing. There's some uncertainty upside there that, Wright was especially bad in receiving. He had 78 routes, only 6 targets, 3 catches, and 8 yards, an absurd 0.1 yards per route run. 78 routes isn't a ton, but did absolutely nothing with the routes that he did get. I don't think Ollie Gordon's going to run a ton of routes. I think that just reinforces the Achane stuff. I actually have in my notes here that if Achane isn't getting those targets, I don't actually think his receiving market share is transferable to another running back, or if he gets hurt, because it's a specific play design thing, and they didn't actually throw to the back a lot before him. And if you go back to McDaniel's offenses with the Niners before McCaffrey was in that offense, and a specific back that Shanahan's now calling pass plays for, they didn't throw to the backs a lot. They didn't throw to Elijah Mitchell when he was a rookie and was the lead guy in those types of offenses. So this offense, I think if Achane gets hurt, I actually think it's upside for Jonnu Smith on the quick hitters, and I think it's upside for Tyreek and Waddle to be more of the focus of the offense and those things. But I think the way I play this behind Achane is the rookie Ollie Gordon having the potential to be like a green zone hammer with size and get a lot of touchdowns the way Mostert had 20 touchdowns 2 years ago. And I think Gordon is the best bet to kind of have that Mostert role. I don't know that he'd have a 20 touchdown upside, but that's the way I like the backup running backs.
Let's go to receiver, and Tyreek's a really interesting one. We are very conservative on our inputs with him just due to age and just kind of some vibes around there. Just could see if the season doesn't start off well, things maybe not going great as far as how he's meshing with the team. We have him at 115 targets. You've got him at 140. You run a little hotter, but I think that's kind of, if we were just looking at the numbers, our projection would be much higher. We're kind of building in a little bit more of a conservative thing with Tyreek, and I'm really torn on it. I know Adam's very spooked by Tyreek, and I get it, but I also am like, man, I look at the other receivers that go by him. They're not going to finish the year top 3 in fantasy points per game, and we know Tyreek could potentially. So definitely curious your thoughts on Tyreek, because I'm torn on this one.
I love that we have this range in our targets, 115 to 140. In some cases, I'm like, what did I do wrong? In this case, I'm like, we're just playing the risk differently. And this is a good representation to the audience of the fact that, as I said, the base projections almost don't matter in this offense. You just acknowledged it. He has the ceiling. He also has a lot of risk. He was over 3 yards per out run, both 2022 and 2023. He was at 1.75 last year. What's weird is you have Jalen Waddle, should be in his prime. He's over 2.5 yards per out run in both 22 and 23. And I'm thinking he's got contingent upside if Tyreek ever has a year like he did in 2024. Tyreek has that year, and Waddle goes all the way down to 1.53 yards per route and is frequently leaving games. And I have this little note where he should be in his prime. Tyreek's 31, but who is less reliable here? Because Waddle that's been the deal with Waddle dating back to Alabama. He never ran full route share. He never could really stay on the field. I just don't know if he's a player that has the ability to play a full season and run all the routes and everything, or else he's just sort of a situational guy, basically. Early in his NFL career, he did get more routes and more volume overall and stay healthy in those things, but he just seems to always kind of have some injuries. I think his price came in a little hot. I expected him to be, after a frustrating 2024, I expected him to be cheaper. I expected him to be like a round 7 pick. He's like a round 4 or 5 pick, depending on format. And so I'm not really into Waddle. And I think you can view these guys interchangeably in that either's poor 2024 can be used to kind of talk about the other's 2025 rebound. You can look at the fact that Hill is so old and you can say he's over the cliff, and that means that Waddle's got real ceiling to be the number 1 going forward. But you can also say that the fact that Waddle didn't capitalize last year means he's never going to be that reliable. And the one guy who has shown the real ceiling in their good years is Hill. And that Waddle's basically a second fiddle at best and works off of that. And so the fact that Waddle couldn't, take over in 2024 improves the fact that Hill may have a chance to rebound at 31 years old. It's really tricky. I tend to like Hill more for the reasons that, I'm sharing about Waddle and that we're talking about with the offense and that range of receiver. Like you said, to me, the guys he goes around we'll talk about one like Garrett Wilson. I really like Garrett Wilson's talent. I have a hard time seeing where Garrett Wilson's ceiling can match what Tyreek Hill's ceiling can be. and I tend to chase ceiling in these spots. The other thing I'll just throw in is it's really only these guys that I think are all that draftable. They brought in Nick Westbrook Achane. He's going to have some volume, but because I'm projecting such a concentration of the offense, which is kind of the way it typically plays out, I have NWI lower than you guys in targets. I don't know what the ceiling could really be for him. It's like, well, they brought in Odell Beckham last year. They're talking about using him. He barely got used. Malik Washington.
These are round 18. It's like who are you? You got Tua and you need to stack in round 18. Who are you taking?
And I still don't know if I'm doing it. Is sort of my point. Malik Washington probably would be my answer because he's a year 2 guy and there's probably some uncertainty upside. He's got the athleticism. If Tyreek's not good enough, I think Malik Washington has to fill that role from an athleticism standpoint in the offense. So he's the one that, if somebody comes out of nowhere and concentrates volume and certain types of usage, he's the one that would be my bet. But it's tricky beyond these 2 top receivers.
Yeah, I think Malik's more of like legitimate upside bet. Westbrook Achane is probably your better bet to just like get a guy that's on the field more frequently.
For sure.
I will say I am higher on Waddle here. I think, and the price varies. It's come up on Underdog a decent bit, but FFPC is still going like the 6-7 turn kind of right now in our latest season-long ADP poll. I do think that the wide receivers here are just going to see their target share increase a decent bit over last year. And with that and the possible efficiency in this offense, I think he can be fine even if Tyreek's very good and still have that upside. I know it hasn't come through yet, but still have that upside if something happens to Tyreek. So I'm a little bit more into Waddle, but I kind of just into this offense in general. And we take that to Jonnu Smith, and I don't know how much of it is the people are just scared of Miami or people are really buying into the trade rumors of Jonnu to Pittsburgh. His price, we kind of liked him to start the offseason, and the price has just gotten cheaper. And this is where, especially on Underdog, I'm like, man, I got to pull a backdoor stack out. If I don't have a tight end and, it's round 10, or round 9 and Jonnu's there, I can take Jonnu knowing I can get Tua in round 13 or whatever. And I'm really fine doing that, even if I don't end up with one of the receivers early, just because of, the cost of that stack.
I think there are people that are concerned about the lack of involvement early and the fact that, a lot of his stuff was these sort of designed quick hit passes when the season went awry. And it's not what McDaniel actually really wanted to do. It's kind of correlated with the wide receiver down years, and that's not what they're going to plan for. That said, there's no other tight end in round 10 or beyond that has the clear and obvious projectable ceiling that Jonnu Smith has for the reasons you just. I mean, it's pretty straightforward to me. If you play fantasy a certain type of way and you're like, I need to get a lot of things right to win these big best ball tournaments and things, I get to those spots and I'm like, I think Jonnu Smith, if I'm going to get lucky and nail a top 3 overall tight end in this range, Jonnu Smith's the best bet for it. If he gets traded, obviously I already think I lost. I think that's would be a major hit and be very concerning. And I was concerned about the trade rumors for a bit. It seems like that's probably not going to happen. And I guess I don't think that he's going to have no production, especially when you see the wide receivers coming off the tough year and there is risk with it. I mean, Jonnu's the other guy. He's the other dude that you're looking at and saying, if Achane, as I said, if Achane misses time, I think that's a benefit to Jonnu in the sense that they used him in the same type of quick hit, wide receiver screen, catch and run, yak play type of way. And I think the play calls might just go towards Jonnu. If Hill or Waddle are not great, I think you're talking about more volume toward Jonnu. It's an offense you want a piece of because the way he can concentrate. We saw in his final 8 games how good he was. I think, he's definitely another target from this offense.
Yeah, it's a lot of optimism from us on Miami. It's a good place to potentially find league winners, and that's what we're in here for. Let's go over to the Jets. And we do have a little bit of discrepancy on the play calling here. We're at 62 plays per game. Gretch is at 61. A lot of the difference in plays is attributed to us having a higher pass rate at 60%, Gretch at 57%. I know before the show, Ben was saying how he was interested to hear about our pass rate. And I told him not to get too excited because I'm relying on our model here a little bit, and we have manually lowered it from the model. It tries to strip out difference between like quarterback and offensive coordinator. So I don't know if it's just, giving Fields, a bit more a potential pass rate with this negative expected game script for the Jets. Their average spread is 4. They still were winning games with him in Pittsburgh, and there's also the Arthur Smith component. But they were also, I think, at the 57% pass rate Gretch has when he was in his last year in Chicago. Correct me if I have that number wrong, but I think it was right around the 57%. Long-winded way of saying our models got them closer to league average, all things considered. My gut feel, if I was just looking at things and manually putting a number on it, would be a bit closer to Gretch's. But we do have lots of sacks and scrambles with Fields, which is always the case. He was a little bit better in sack rate last year, but we still have a high number on him. So it nets out to us being at about 30 pass attempts per game, 29 rush attempts per game. Gretch at 29 pass attempts per game and 29.5 rush attempts per game. So those end up being like huge differences. But yeah, that's it on the play calling from me.
Yeah. And I want to give a hat tip to the Coach Speak Index. I pulled some of my take here from some of his compiling of the different quotes and things in the offseason. But Aaron Glenn, new defensive-minded head coach, talked about Fields' athleticism. He said he brings the dimension to this game that a lot of people are trying to create around this league that we could take advantage of, that sort of obviously multi-dimensional run game that you can use your quarterback in. It has been something that has been a way to combat these lighter defenses, the cover 2 shells, the trying to take away deep passing and that type of focus from defenses that we've talked a lot about. And I think they're also talking about how they have the best 3 running backs in the league, or Aaron Glenn had made that comment as well. And you have Breece Hall, you have a young Braylon Allen who was like 20 years old last year, didn't necessarily have a great year, but I think has plenty of potential advanced metric wise for Allen. And then Isaiah Davis, the third back, also had some interesting elements to his game as a rookie. So you have all these running backs, you have Justin Fields, and then you also have you have the way that they built their offensive line. So they drafted Armand Membu, I think his name is 7th overall. He's more of a run blocking guy, like first and foremost, or the expectation is. And the expectation overall, I think, is that this is kind of a really good run blocking unit. Very good interior. All 5 guys have better run blocking grades than pass blocking grades. And so after like looking through some of the O-line stuff as well, and then just like the strength of the team being in the running back position, field strengths, the comments. The OC comes over from Detroit as well. He's been the passing game coordinator the last 3 years. Obviously, we have very different QB styles from the Detroit offense with Jared Goff, who's not mobile. But that offense was very run-based, even with Jared Goff. Now you start to talk about Fields' athleticism maybe being utilized as a challenge it can create for defenses. I think the mix of all of those things is pretty straightforward, including how Detroit has led with the run the last few years. And I have the same number as you on Fields in Chicago, 57% pass rate. That's kind of how his offense was in the past as well. I looked at all those things and I came through, even though they're expected to be pretty bad, I think they're going to be a pretty negative PROE team, because the worst team leads to a higher expected pass rate. They're going to be trailing. I still think they're going to run the ball enough that it's going to be a low pass rate. And so the other big part of that also is other than Garrett Wilson, there's not a lot of pass catching talent on the offense. So the running back's really the strength of the skill positions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just leaving a note to our guys. I think we'll probably end up 58.5%, maybe a little bit closer to Gretch, but not all the way down there, just giving the model some credit. But regardless, we're pretty in on Fields at his cost right now. I think he's like just good enough passing and then has the really strong rushing upside. And this year, it's Tyrod Taylor behind him. It's just hard to imagine a situation where they don't just play it out with Fields. I think the bench risk, I know Levitan agrees, is pretty low here, which is optimistic for Fields, because I think that's more what you're worried about is like the real life production and what's at risk there, more so than the fantasy production for him. So are you buying Fields at like QB 10-ish right now?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the bust risk is pretty low. They didn't give him a massive QB contract, but they did give him a decent number in like the $20 million a year range. I think there were some contract people talking about how it created sort of a new tier of QB contracts. It's not one of these cheap veteran contracts. It's not one of the, all the good quarterbacks or top quarterbacks are just resetting the market in the $40, $50 million, $60 million range a year. Fields, I think, got like 2 years, $40 million. Enough of an investment, I think, from the team that you would expect them to be viewing him as their starter. I mean, it's more than backup money is the point I'm trying to make. His tendencies impact we were talking about the called pass rate, but they also impact the run pass attempts overall. We've talked in past years about how Fields is a unique player in terms of really high sack rates, really high scramble rates. You have to go back 2 years, but coming off of his 2022, he had a 28% of his dropbacks were non-pass attempts, were a combination of either sack or a scramble, which are the other outcomes, which is an absurd number. Like no one else hits 20%. Even mobile quarterbacks are typically below 15%. Most mobile quarterbacks. He's gotten that down in the last couple of years. So his last year in Detroit, that 2023 year where he was a full-time starter, he was at 19%. And then last year in his 6 games, he was at 18.3%. But that's still going to be like close to league high. I mean, that's right around where the highest other players were, the rookies. That's one of the issues with rookie QBs is they tend to hold the ball longer. They can't read out defenses. They're going to take some sacks. They're going to scramble, those kinds of things. And so it will impact the total pass attempt volume. So I have them pretty low in called pass plays. I also have these tendencies to turn called passes into non-pass attempts, leading to an expectation. I haven't finished all my projections, but an expectation that this team will be last in pass attempts in my projections, and maybe meaningfully. So I do think it doesn't mean they're going to definitely finish there, but if you think about the range of outcomes, what's the ceiling and actual pass volume and those things, it is pretty tricky if you're worried about pass rate and the ability to turn passes into attempts. So, but Fields, as far as that related to Fields, sorry to tie that back to what you were asking, I think the rushing will definitely be there. I do worry that his passing will be almost like too bad to give him the real ceiling, even though the rushing will be solid. Like Anthony Richardson last year still had great rushing numbers, but the passing was so bad sometimes that it didn't even matter. The passing fantasy points.
He might be kind of like old school Tyrod Taylor, who's backing up behind him, where it's like ends up being more of a floor thing than a ceiling thing for him. I still think he's a good buy, like where he goes, but I do get the point that you're looking to get pretty firmly a QB 6 through 12 here, as opposed to, a top 5 QB. And we have talked about some of the pocket passers that go QB 15 to 20 that could also, make that leap to like QB 8 to 12 with just a really, really strong passing season. Keep in mind the context, everybody who's listening, what Ben said about the sack and scrambles and how that affects everything. Because we're going to go to the skill players now. We'll go to Breece Hall. Really tricky projection for us. We recently bumped him up. We were decent bit behind ADP. Now we're like right at ADP. We've got 200 rush attempts and 55 targets. You're at 215 and 61. I kind of thought your numbers might be a little bit higher. So it seems like you might have a touch concern here with Breece. They did rotate more last year. His efficiency dropped off. And another guy that's really tough to know what to do with, because he does have kind of the archetype of back that we generally want to buy in these rounds, especially if you were to like cover up last year a little bit. But you can't, ignore the most recent sample, and Braylon Allen was a strong rusher. So what are you doing with Breece?
Yeah, he's tricky. I do still believe in the talent, even though the numbers weren't great last year. All the backs didn't have great numbers because Aaron Rodgers is already talking about how the run game was so poorly designed and all these things. I do think there's something to the fact that the offense was not well designed last year, and it hurt the players' ability to be very good. The issue with Breece for me is so much of his value has been tied up in his really strong receiving ability. He caught 76 balls 2 years ago, 57 last year. I don't think he can touch those numbers. I don't even think those are really in the range. I do think 40 seems doable because about 20% of Fields' targeted passes have gone to running backs the past couple of years, which isn't horrible for a mobile QB. But the reason I don't think it is the stuff about Fields' tendencies directly relates to running backs. Guys like Tom Brady or pocket passers who don't take sacks and don't scramble, they get down to the check down and they throw to running backs. Tom Brady's running backs always caught a lot of passes. These immobile quarterbacks that can process really well. Fields is the exact opposite. He doesn't process particularly well. I think he's really talented, very accurate thrower of the football. I'm a big Fields fan, but his limitation is processing in the play, which is why he holds the ball so long, takes sacks and things. And with mobile quarterbacks, what we often see is they read out downfield, and then instead of a check down, they run, right? And so he does get to the check down more than most mobile quarterbacks, but you're going to see sacks and scrambles take away from the check down to the running back, right? And so that's a big problem for Breece, particularly when he's been reliant on, big receiving numbers the last 2 years for a running back, 55 plus catches both years, 75 plus 2 years ago in his great season. I do think his rushing yards per carry should see a boost for the reasons we talk about with mobile quarterbacks. Defenses have to be afraid of the quarterback pulling and going onto the edge. It opens up the internal rushing. You have the strong interior of the line that I was talking about, really strong running back, run blocking grades on the interior of the line, and then scheme and all of that stuff, I think should be beneficial to Breece. So you're going to see, I think, good rushing numbers, a concern on his passing stuff. He's talented. I think the efficiency can be there. But the fact that they're talking about using all three backs, they're talking about Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, like really liking them, and it's a new regime. And I don't know that they see this as big of a gap in talent as we in the fantasy community probably do. I think they see it as closer. And you look at what the Lions have done the last few years, where to me, Jahmyr Gibbs is just way, way better than David Montgomery. But they've always seen that as closer than I've seen it. Like they like to use multiple backs over there. I'm a little concerned about Breeze's ability to get the overall volume, and then especially with the receiving stuff. So I don't love clicking him where he's at.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly with you there. Looking at Braylon Allen, in my head, he had a better rushing efficiency season than he did. I'm looking at it, though. He finished at sub 4 yards per carry. He actually had, a really strong stretch out of the gate, which is probably in my head, above 4 yards per carry each of the first 4 games. One of those was a 1 carry game, so can't really count it. But he literally only had one other game all season long where he exceeded 4 yards per carry, and it was 4.3, and he finishes at 3.6 on the season. So it wasn't as good of a season as I expected. And, he will need to ice Isaiah Davis for him to have fantasy value as a handcuff here, or as someone that has, maybe a touch of standalone value if they are run heavy and sprinkle in multiple backs. So are you drafting any of the backup running backs for the Jets?
I think you hit it well. I mean, Braylon Allen was only 20 years old at the start of last year. I traded for him in a dynasty situation early in the offseason because I was like, yeah, this guy had a good year last year, and he's super young, and he's a talented player, and he's got a long career ahead of him. And then as I dug into these projections and dug into it more, I was a little concerned about the efficiency, a little concerned about Isaiah Davis, even if Breece misses time. And then the Fields acquisition and the Fields tendencies and all of these things I was talking about with Breece, they relate to any back in the offense as far as how it could play out. And then, the thing with Braylon Allen, he's a bigger back. I think you're talking about the ceiling for him is a high touchdown rate as well. And this is not an offense that's expected to score a lot of touchdowns either. And so I guess, yeah, I don't love clicking Breece in his range. I also don't necessarily love playing it through the cheaper running backs either, because it's just a crowded room.
Yeah, it's a tough set of skill players to get behind. And we'll go to Garrett Wilson. I know we were burned on being low on DJ Moore a couple years ago. I think we both still stand by that was one of the biggest sun running outcomes I think I've ever
Yes.
seen. There's room for us to have been wrong and for DJ Moore to have sun run a bit that season. The volume concerns really come through when you're putting an expensive price tag on a receiver. Now there's like no target competition whatsoever. So the target share potential for Garrett Wilson is through the roof, but it is just tough for me to take even a very talented young wide receiver where he's going when you're on a team that's not expected to score a lot, not expected to throw a lot, and the QB is not the most efficient of quarterbacks. So you've got Garrett Wilson 142 targets, 240 full PPR points. We've got him at 123 targets, 207 full PPR points. We do have quite a high ceiling target share on him that's not reflected in these base numbers. We're into the 30s, which we don't get into for that many players. So that's definitely a good sign, like relative to the players he goes with. But the overall environment still keeps us, for the most part, a little bit behind ADP on Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, and I was kind of pushing my target share to see how high I saw the target. I have him at 29% in my base here. So that's why he's at 142, even though I talked about the low overall pass attempt volume. He's a tricky dude, man. I think he's super talented. I think he's better than he gets credit for. He was really good with the ball in his hand last year. He forced a lot of missed tackles and that stuff. And yet his efficiency, his yards per target efficiency has been bad every year of his career. You can blame a lot of that on QB play. He's had really bad QB play for the most part. And then last year when he had Aaron Rodgers, they get Devontae Adams, and Rodgers is just like throwing to Adams every play. It feels like with the addition of Fields, you have the addition of probably RPOs. The first read stuff can be huge there. That's part of why I think the target share can get really concentrated. We talked about it on the last show, but RPOs lead to more target share for the number one wide receiver. That's research I did at my newsletter a couple of years ago. But that does hold. Our buddy JJ Zacharyson also found the same in studying that. I don't even really know who's second in target share on this offense. Like, it could be a few different guys. We'll talk about that. The upside proxy for him is DJ Moore 2023, which was with Fields, right? The thing about DJ Moore's 2023 that's interesting is his yards per target really spiked. He was in the 7s the 2 years prior. With Carolina, he got over 10 with Fields. Part of the sack and scramble stuff with Fields leads to higher per target efficiency because it leads to lower pass attempts. They don't throw the ball away, these quarterbacks, and therefore you're going to get only the more efficient targets are the balls when they get actually released. Another quarterback who is like this is Russell Wilson. His time in Seattle would take a lot of sacks and scramble at a high rate. And Tyler Lockett always had these crazy yards per target numbers and catch rate numbers. And it's because anytime they're going to have a low probability throw, Wilson's taking a sack instead of throwing the low probability throw. Fields is a little bit like that. So I do think Wilson's typically low after the target efficiency, yards per target stuff should bounce up. It should be expected to bounce up because of Fields' tendencies. And yet there's just a little bit of a new, like a statistical trick there. It doesn't necessarily mean that it gives him more ceiling because it's coming with the fact that the pass attempts are low because of the sacks and the scrambles and the ball's not getting out. I'm into Garrett Wilson having a good year. And I think Justin Fields good enough. He's going to have a good year. I'm not into a third round wide receiver type of ceiling. I want that guy to have a top 5 overall ceiling. This is a dude that goes right by Tyreek Hill, and to me, it's pretty straightforward. I like the young guys. I like Garrett Wilson's talent. I'd way rather be in on Garrett Wilson, but you look at the offensive structures, to me, it's very straightforward. Which of these players can be the dude you needed in fantasy? And it would be Tyreek because of what we've seen him do before in the last couple of years. Garrett Wilson has a really tough time being anything other than just a small hit in this offense, unless, and you mentioned Tyrod Taylor's the backup. Even if Fields isn't the QB anymore, you have a mobile quarterback backing him up. And just the whole structure being very run-based, it's really tricky.
Then we go to tight end, rookie Mason Taylor there. We're at 43 targets. Gretch a little lower at 47. We're a bit behind ADP on him, really mostly just relevant as, a TE3 late in best ball. Any thoughts on Mason Taylor?
Never earned much volume per route. Doesn't have great yards per targets in college. I'm pretty skeptical of the profile. Career 109 yards per route run. His high was only 1.23 last year. There's film people really like him. He got a lot of draft capital, and he's young at least as an early declare. But you're talking about all these volume issues in the offense, and I think it's a pretty big problem. I think, Josh Reynolds they're talking about is probably the number 2, and I think him and Taylor are sort of the best bets to see volume behind Wilson. But when I gave Wilson the 29% target share, the way the rest of my projections split out was like Reynolds has 54 targets, Mason Taylor has 47, and then I have all of like Alan Lazard, Arian Smith, Malachi Corley, Jeremy Ruckert, and Stone Smart getting at least 20 targets, like between 20 and 35, like some volume, like down the rest of the depth chart. Again, there's not a lot of overall targets, and you are probably talking about the running backs getting some, and you're talking just from a talent perspective, and you're talking about Garrett Wilson getting a lot, and I just don't see the path for the other guys.
Let's go to New England. We both have them below average in plays, between 61.5 and 62. It's about a play and a half below league average, roughly. We're at a 61.6% called pass rate. Gretch is at a 59% called pass rate. So that does lead to some discrepancies. We're at 2 pass attempts per game higher for New England, 1.5 rush attempts lower than Gretch there. I think just we're hoping they rely on May a little bit more year 2, and that kind of offsets the game script expected to be better. They did throw a lot with May last year, but that was with a negative PROE. They had a 65% pass rate in his starts, but that's because they were trailing a lot, with a negative 1.3% PROE with May at the helm. So hoping that becomes a little bit more neutral as the game scripts, and the scoring is expected to get much better for New England too. They've got one of the biggest discrepancies positively between what they averaged last year and their team total this year. I think it's like a 5-point swing in their favor.
Yeah, I love that you guys are more aggressive than me on the pass rate. I didn't know really where to land with a young QB, but that win total point or point scoring point that you mentioned, it was fascinating to me to get into the projection and see that they're projected for 8.5 wins and expected to be a pretty good offense, because the market is buying into Drake May a little bit, and that's, I think, fair. I thought he was very good last year. I think you talk to basically anybody who watches a lot of the games and does kind of film study and stuff, and people think that Drake May has it, that he has what you need. And they tried to add some talent around him. They had a really bad O-line last year by basically every grade, but they brought in 3 probably average free agents. And then they also took Will Campbell 4th overall, plus a center 95th overall, and a 3rd O-lineman late in the draft. So they had 3 free agent additions, 3 rookie, 3 draft picks, really trying to address the offensive line this offseason. And that Campbell pick in the top 5 overall, he's expected to be a long-term starter at left tackle, obviously. If they can make the offensive line a quick overhaul like they're trying to do, make it, at least in like an average unit or a solid unit, I think you're talking about a much better situation for May to operate in. And so, you're looking at the potential for some decent plays, even on an offense that we don't think of as super exciting. A little bit of tempo, probably. They did play with a little bit of tempo with May. And I like your guys' pass rate more than mine, that it's up over 61%. I think that's certainly viable, and certainly the way that I would expect this team to be trending if May is kind of the centerpiece of the offense. Vrabel's comments this offseason, he said a little bit about how when they had the really run-based offense when he was a coach at Tennessee, it's because they had Derrick Henry. And he was like, that's not specifically the way that we want to run our offense. And so, he's basically acknowledged, look, they brought in Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels likes to throw the ball a decent amount. And so, I'm expecting going through the projection mostly is what made me expect it. I wasn't expecting it all offseason, but going through the projection and looking into it, I'm expecting a reasonably fun New England team.
Yeah, and May is pretty affordable. He's QB 15 right now on Underdog. We have him QB 13, but admittedly, there's a lot of guys that are clustered pretty tight there. But he's got enough rushing chops, to have a ceiling. They do go out and get Stephon Diggs, who we'll talk about, his range of outcomes here. But if Diggs can be good, hopefully that can help May take a step forward. There's definitely some question marks with some of the other pass catching talent around him. They've drafted guys the last couple of years, but guys last year didn't have good rookie seasons. And then Kyle Williams wasn't a super early pick this year. At running back, one of the guys they drafted, though, Travion Henderson, is someone we're a little ahead of ADP on. Just comparing to RJ Harvey, we kind of like Henderson as the better value there right now. Just a little bit better prospect profile in our opinion. There's some question marks over how much rushing volume he can get up to. But he is, a fun player that's supposed to be like very good in pass protection and like really supposed to be out there a lot. Despite maybe not having great college receiving numbers, just keep in mind a ton of teammate competition for him in college, both at, with Judkins at running back, but then just for targets in terms of the wide receivers there being very good. You've got him at 50 targets. We're at 46, total of 206 PPR points for you, 179 for us. But yeah, rookie running back that I think, we're in on just a little bit, one of the better costs relative to the draft capital and prospect profile.
Yeah, I'm super in on him. I did want to mention, I really like May as well. You said the QB 15. I think his rushing upside is higher than people realize. He had 49 rush attempts in his 10 main games, which is like an 83 rush attempt pace, which there's only like 5 or 6 QBs who had more than that last year. Pretty meaningful amount, and he was very efficient. He played 13 games, but a third of his game, he was under a third of the snaps in 3 of those games. So I'm referencing the other 10. And then you mentioned the win total stuff, and I had to bump up the TD rates when I got done with this projection to get in line with that expected. I'm mentioning the win total. You mentioned the look ahead lines, but the expected points for the offense, which is positive for May's pass TD rate. It's positive potentially for his rush TD rate as well. Obviously, being a mobile quarterback can hit him on the touchdowns both ways. And so, like, you asked me about Fields. Like, May's the one that sticks in my head when I think about Fields. Like, I can just get May cheaper. He's got way more passing upside.
I was kind of thinking about that as like, I was like, oh, I just talked to Fields, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, and this is too where the best ball versus redraft brain's a little different. Where like best ball, you're going to need to draft 2 to 3, so you can't just be like, well, I'll get the Fields guy later. But in redraft, you can kind of have more of that mindset of like, just give me the better skill player bet now. Because I'm only making 1 or 2 quarterback bets.
On Travion, yeah, I thought you said it really well. He's a really interesting prospect. Really good explosive play rate. They've talked up how explosive he is since they've drafted him in all their comments. They took him pretty aggressively. I mean, Quinshon Judkins went ahead of him, but they took him ahead of the Bears, who a lot of people I think wanted him to land on the Bears. The Bears ended up taking Luther Burden. I think a lot of people thought the Patriots were going to go wide receiver there, and they ended up going Kyle Williams a little later. They go get Travion because they're just looking to add talent is basically the way they've talked about it, and they think he's that good. And I think that's very favorable when you think about the draft capital and what it means. The big question for me on him is not really, again, about a base projection. I didn't have an amazing base projection on him. And I think Ramondre is still good, and he'll still stay involved. And I have to mention that Antonio Gibson had really good efficiency numbers last year, like looked surprisingly amazing in like evasion rates and some of this stuff. The backfield's probably pretty solid at this point. But the thing with Travion to me is like, I'm feeling really good about him being a game breaker in fantasy playoff time, that he's going to be playing a lot more at that point in the season. And the question is sort of how soon does the backfield tilt towards him, because he's just so dynamic. I mean, the comp that came up a lot in prospect season from people who do more prospect work than me was Jahmyr Gibbs, that he was sort of that kind of guy. He's got the good receiving profile, very explosive in the receiving game. His like yards per target are like wide receiver numbers. He's breaking a bunch of plays in the passing game, breaking a bunch of plays in the run game as well. Judkins was sort of the hammer in this offense, but Travion was, or the thunder, and Travion was the lightning, if you will. And I think that's the way they're going to use him early, and maybe his volume won't be super strong from a week 1 volume perspective. When I think about a projection, often I'm thinking about what we know now, but he's an anti-fragile pick from the perspective of like anything that changes breaks favorably for him. If anything happens to Stevenson or Gibson, or just they're not very good this year, because they're just kind of older. And I mean, one of the big things on Stevenson, he's had really poor receiving efficiency for 3 straight years, under 5 yards per target all 3 years. I mean, I think that immediately is beneficial to Henderson. Gibson played a lot in the passing game last year, but you don't take Henderson to sort of let Antonio Gibson play more than him in the past game. So the whole thing is just a question of how soon until he takes over. And I do think towards the end of the year, he'll more or less get as much work as makes sense for him without real limitations, even if it's not a massive amount of overall work, but he'll be able to. It's sort of similar to Bucky Irving last year, how he worked into a big role and then White became sort of an afterthought, but he was still not like 100% of the backfield. It was just kind of like whatever Bucky can take, he'll take, and he'll be good and he'll be efficient. And that's the way I expect the end of the season to look. It's just a question of, I mean, if you're taking Ramondre, you're like, how long can I hold him off, right? And if you're taking Travion, you're like, how long do I have to wait until he's just a clear every week player in my, weekly managed leagues?
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's go to wide receiver. Stephon Diggs, you've got 106 targets. We're at 96 targets. He's coming back from, the midseason ACL tear last year. I really struggle with these guys coming back from injury. Guys have come back from the ACL stuff, pretty routinely recently, as long as it's been kind of like the normal ACL tear, which I believe Diggs's was. The concern that you get layered on with Diggs is that, he's entering his age 32 season, has seen, a little bit of a drop off in efficiency the last couple of seasons. Not like bad, but definitely, a little bit of a drop off from when he was in his prime in his upper 20s.
Yeah, I was curious your takes on him, and you started with it. I have a hard time with it, and I'm like, crap, because I do too.
I mean, I say like kind of a gun going so late, and they just really don't have much there that I think they're really going to try and make Diggs work and have Diggs try to be the guy that helps, May take the next step. So, gun to my head, I think the situation's good enough that if Diggs just isn't dead, that it's going to be pretty good for him. We talked about Darnell Mooney last podcast, who I like, but they go very close to one another. And I think end of year ceiling, if Diggs is healthy, there's not really a competition there as far as like actual ceiling, like pure ceiling on like Diggs versus a Mooney, for example. Diggs is also going like near, Shakir, Jaden Reed, Josh Downs type. So he's not going with wide receiver ones. And, obviously has the ability to be a wide receiver one. I just don't know this stuff that's hard to quantify in terms of like odds of him being dust between the age and the injury is tough.
Yeah. So last year, the ADOT was down for him. The targets per out run was down. So like I look at this weighted targets per out run stat, it was down. It was expected to be down, and it wasn't down that bad. For several years, 5 years in a row, he was between 0.64 and 0.69 in this weighted targets per out stat. He was down at 0.54, which is still good. It's comparable to some of his early seasons in Minnesota. 23% targets per out at an 8.3 ADOT. It's not amazing, but it's not terrible. What I think is kind of interesting is his yards per target wound up pretty solid, about 8. After the first couple games, the ADOT was so low that it looked like maybe he would just. I mean, he had a yards per reception under 10 in each of his first 3 games, but then in the next 5 games, he played 8. He had a yards per reception over 12 in 4 of the 5. So we sort of like I've said a couple times this offseason that Diggs was I thought starting to fit into the offense and starting to come along right when he got hurt, where he was actually starting to hit on some bigger plays and some more efficiency, and his receiving lines looked like normal receiving lines, like 6 catches for 77 yards and that kind of thing, as opposed to 10 for 94 he had in week 3, where it's like, you're not getting down the field enough for me, buddy. Had at least 6 targets in every game, had at least 4 receptions in every game, all 8 games that he played with the Texans last year. Gets back to this like 23% targets per route, still being pretty good. I don't, like you said, as long as he still has something in the tank, the situation's really good. And I completely agree with that. And it feels like he probably does still have, I mean, based on the way that he played last year, I just don't know about the ACL recovery, right? But based on the way that he played last year, he probably still has the ability to be a guy who earns volume. Like I said, 6 targets every game, earns some catches. He's 32 in November, coming off an ACL. That's tricky, but he's always been a dude that's earned a lot of volume. The point I was making about his weighted targets per out run for like 5 years straight is that it was always strong. Even as his efficiency has waned at times, He's always been a guy who gets the ball. And I think part of that is the personality stuff where people say he's a cancer. I think he's vocal in a way that a lot of these number ones, they get the ball because they demand it, right? And I think Diggs is that type of personality. And in a room like this, what they have behind him is they basically brought back everyone from last year. They don't have KJ Osborne back, but Demario Douglas, Keishon Butte, Jalen Polk, and Javon Baker, the two rookies, are still there. Kendrick Bourne is still there. And then they add Diggs, they add the rookie Kyle Williams, and they add Mac Hollins, who had his career high season, 690 yards under Josh McDaniels playing for the Raiders 3 years ago, and has had a meaningful role on two other offenses since then. And now he's back working with McDaniels. So they had three guys to a group of five that were all there last year, and it's like 8 receivers deep. I think that's bad for the guys like Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, who they're the rookies from last year. I think they're kind of already moving on from. But the point being that there's not really a clear the other point being as it relates to Diggs, there's not really a clear number one or somebody with any kind of veteran presence or anything to compete with Diggs. Hollins has a veteran presence, but he's a clear ancillary player, doesn't like demand volume. Diggs is going to come in and be the vocal number one in the offseason program. He's going to be the guy that's leading by example and all of those types of things. If he has it, I mean, Josh McDaniels' offenses have always really liked the wide receiver one. And, you know, to your point, they're trying to give a guy for May to be his wide receiver one. If Diggs still has it, I think the situation, as you said, sets up well for him to be that guy.
Yeah, and then looking at the other receivers in terms of ADP, I have a tough time getting behind, the Kyle Williams ADP right now. Sometimes, again, I think I'm buying the rookie receivers in the situations where the market's like, overly concerned about landing spot, and sometimes I'm fading them when the market seems like overly optimistic about landing spot. But I think because of this opportunity for targets, his ADP is really getting driven up. But if you look at the other receivers that he's drafted around, Tesla was one pick later. I mean, he's around 18 guy. Betch goes a couple rounds later. Trey Harris goes later. Luther Burden went a full round earlier and has about the same ADP and a better prospect profile. So I'm a little weary about where Kyle Williams is going. I know, in redraft, I'll always bump up the rookie a little bit more just because we're only caring about that ceiling. But I hate to be out on a rookie wide receiver, but right now I'm out on Kyle Williams. Are you more optimistic on Kyle Williams, or any thoughts there?
It's interesting. You're talking about it from a draft capital perspective. I have a hard time with it from, as I talk through prospects, listeners probably are aware that I'm more of a production-based analyst, I guess, than more film-based. Kyle Williams, I think, is really liked by some people who look at the film and dig into that stuff. I think it's tough when the production doesn't necessarily follow what people are seeing on film, because I want the ability to actually translate those skills to stats at the lower level. What I can't get over with is he played with Cam Ward, the number one overall pick, in his 4th college year for Kyle Williams. He was already pretty old, and he wasn't very good. He just had it was one of his worst college years, actually. He had spent 3 years at UNLV, transferred to Washington State. They played together there, and Kyle Williams wasn't very good. He had a really good 5th year at Washington State after Ward moved on to Miami. But other than the 5th year, the overall body of work is not great. It's not horrible. There's some decent target earning at times. People have talked about him as a big play threat, a deep threat, and that does fit well with May. And again, the film guys seem to really like him. So I'm open to being wrong on him, definitely. I'm always open to being wrong on any of these takes. But for him particularly, the body of work and the production profile, and the fact that he didn't really have a great season until he's a 5th-year senior, and he's much older than some of the competition. We know the age-adjusted stuff, is what it is. It's a little concerning, especially then when you go into – there's a lot of not threats in this past game, but just the guys that could at least take away routes from a rookie and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Mac Hollins is going to play, I think, a decent amount. The coaches love him. Demario Douglas, I don't think is amazing or anything, and his targets per out really fell from 23% as a rookie to 19% last year, which is meaningful at a lower ADOT specifically. For a guy like him, you want to be at the 23% higher rate. So he looks like probably just a role player at best, a low ADOT kind of slot guy. We didn't get to see the year 2, strong year 2 to build off a decent rookie year. And yet he's going to be out there in the slot probably a decent amount running routes. Keishon Butte probably, or Polk or Baker, whoever of those guys, it's the younger outside players, plays. Kendrick Bourne possibly. They still have both Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper, who we're going to talk about, who both had decent numbers for tight ends last year. They're on the wrong side of 30, but they're going to play in some 2 tight end sets together. I think they did that a decent amount last year, and I'm sure they'll carry over some of that. Vrabel did some of that earlier in his Tennessee days, and it helps with protection and a lot of different things. You have 2 veteran tight ends. I think you kind of lean into that probably. Maybe not a ton. The point is, I think Kyle Williams has some threat to overall routes, and the profile is not so sterling that I would expect a rookie smash. And so the opportunity's there in the same way that it's there for Diggs. And if Diggs is too old, then it's really there for Kyle Williams. But I struggle with it too, as you were saying.
Yeah, just overpriced. I know you mentioned the kind of shaky analytical profile. Reading JJ Zacharyason's guide kind of has Kyle Williams like a good early breakout, but then just didn't really improve much upon things after that. And that freshman season came in one of like the pandemic years, so it's also a little bit tougher to get a full gauge on. The other guys, I'll take Demario Douglas very late in Drake May stacks. I just think there's a chance like he's out there a decent bit. Aside from that, both the rookies last year, Baker and Polk, were just really disappointing that they're not even really in consideration this year. I don't really think anyone's draftable. Hunter Henry certainly is, especially in best ball where you're drafting 2 to 3 tight ends on most teams. Gretch has Henry at 77 targets. We're at 61, so a little bit of a wider discrepancy there. It seems like in general you just have the tight end targets a bit higher, as you've also got Hooper at 45 and we're at 28.
Yeah, they were at a 30% target share last year, and obviously May was the primary quarterback. They add the receiving talent, but Henry led the team with 97 targets, and Hooper had 59 last year. So I'm quite a ways down on both of them. 20 targets fewer for Henry, about 14 fewer for Hooper. And I wanted to move it even lower, I guess. And I like that you guys did, and I probably should move it even lower because I do think a lot of that's going to transfer over to the receivers. I just had a hard time because I was like, this is who May played with last year and found a little bit of connection with as a rookie. Maybe he relies on them a little bit, and just not really wanting to push Diggs' target share too high, not being sure about the ACL, not really being sure about the profiles at wide receiver behind Diggs. I do think these guys have the potential to take a decent target share, but probably a little bit split as I'm talking through it. I don't know that Henry's like a huge target for that reason because Hooper was good last year. He was pretty efficient. Yards per target was like a full yard better than Henry. Had 1 extra touchdown despite far fewer targets overall. I don't think Hooper's like great. I think some of that was a little bit fluky, but or small sample, I should say. But you have 2 veteran tight ends like this. They're going to kind of step on each other a little bit. But the question is whether the tight ends take a huge share, and if they do, or at least an above average share. If they do, it does, further ding like a Kyle Williams, probably.
All right, that's going to do it for us on the 3rd edition of the Offseason's Projection Special. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Ben, always appreciate all the hard work you put in prepping for this, and also my guys at ETR, Jack and Dink in particular. You can check out all our rankings at establishedrun.com. You can find Ben's content at bengretch.substack.com. Appreciate y'all tuning in.